How you doing, everybody? It's Friday the 7th of May 2010, and it's in the evening, and I've just about an hour ago I was just watching the Modern Mystic Nick, and he's been on talking about wealth and wealth creation over the last couple of videos, and I just wanted to give my little halfpenny's worth because I was going to cover this from a different angle, but I just want to raise it anyway. Okay, this is from my little humble perspective of the whole thing, and I think certainly so far what Nick has raised, I agree with him 100%. You know, so many of the people who make comments, certainly on my little videos that are not worth very much, but so many of them, I think a lot of them are intellectual types, and I think they're extremely well read. A lot of them would be, I would consider to be, and they would probably consider themselves to be gurus, and certainly you know, they would have very I don't know what you would call it, but sort of very flighty and very early ideas, and all book, I call them book notions, you know, notions about things. And I just want to tell you about my first experience about wealth creation. I was 8 years old, and I was a paper boy in the back streets of Belfast. I used to buy and sell papers, right? So I bought them from older boys who got them from the publishing company, the newspaper publishing company, as they come off the presses, and they sold them to me, and I went out and I sold them to the public. Okay, and I got, every time I sold a newspaper, I got a little increment for myself. But that's not what I want to talk about. I met a boy who was older than me. I was about 8 or 9 at the time, and this boy was 15 or 16, and I became fascinated by him because he was really, really bright, and he was into electronics in a big, big way. And he decided that he was going to build a radio. Alright? So I was fascinated. I used to go over every Saturday afternoon and watch him put this radio together. And he bought the parts in the UK. I'm talking about Belfast, so it was easy, you know, it was very, very easy to get the parts in London and the north of England. And he used another radio on a circuit. He got a circuit diagram. Anyway, the bottom line is, he bought all these parts, which of their own volition were, if you tried to sell them, they only had a minimal amount of value on the open market. And he assembled this wonderful radio, a long wave and a medium wave radio. I think it has short wave as well. And he put it together, and he spent hours and hours and hours. And I think it took him in total about 6 weeks to make this radio. It was a lovely thing when it was finished, all polished cabinet, and he got somebody to help him with the actual making the cabinet. But when it was made, he was able to sell it then for the price of 2 men's wages for 1 week, which was approximately, this is in 1956-57, he got £10 for it. Alright? And that brought to mind, it's fixed in my mind, how somebody created wealth. In other words, they took objects which of their own volition had no purpose other than what their creator, the guy who was making the radio, could see what they were worth. And he bought them for small amounts of money, assembled them, and in assembling them created something which had, you know, a market value, because there was a market for radios, and to buy a sophisticated radio like he made would have cost a lot more than £10. I think that's what he got for it, something like £8 or £10. But I remember it was twice what a man earned, an average working class man in Belfast earned at that time for a week. So I learned a lot out of that, and then I realised what I was doing to a lesser extent was something similar, but at a very, very less. I was not putting, the only energy I was putting into what I was doing as a paper boy was, you know, selling to people directly, to them, going to doors and going into public houses and being out on the street and selling and offering them a newspaper. But the thing that I was doing was had more a social value than a direct entrepreneurial value, as it were. That's all it was. My thing was only a small thing, but I did learn a lot out of what the boy did. The other thing that I saw then when I was about 12 was we had a flood where I lived, and I learned about social value, that everything doesn't have necessarily a financial value directly. It does indirectly, but not directly. And what happened was, in the area that I lived, which you can imagine, this is terraced houses in the back streets. It'd be like Glasgow type situation. They weren't tenements, but they're all terraced houses. They'd be like you'd see in Yorkshire or in Wales, and street after street of these things. They're all made for mill workers and for factory workers at the end of the 19th century. All right, and what happened was there was a flood in a particular area close to where I was, and about 20 houses got flooded. And what happened was the drains got blocked. All right, and what happened was the sewage all backed up and went into these houses and was destroying these houses. And if the matter hadn't been dealt with reasonably quickly, a huge number of houses would have been affected. So what happened was, one of my friends, who was another paper boy, he happened to know someone who was a sewage engineer. I didn't even know what a sewage engineer was, but I soon found out. And what happened was, we went and got this man who was a sewage engineer, and we told him what was going on. And down he went, and he got on his bike and went off, and about 3 or 4 hours the problem was all sorted. And he became like a social hero. Up until that time, people laughed when he explained what he did for a living, that he was a sewage engineer, because they couldn't relate to the social function that he performed. But in doing what he did, which was human energy applied to a sort of a semi-crisis, he resolved huge problems and indirectly created a huge amount of wealth for people, because if he hadn't done what he'd done, sort of creating wealth in reverse, as it were, he would have destroyed the wealth that those people had in their homes and in what they consider to be valuable. So that's social value and social wealth. That's like the question that Nick posed about, does a nurse create wealth? Does a civil servant create wealth? Of course they create social wealth. They don't create financial wealth. But people can, once energy is put by any human being, and it can be either applied energy, in other words, the person can be taught, sit down and do these 10 things, and then it's handed on to somebody else, and somebody else does another 10 things. In doing those 10 things, and somebody else doing the other 10 things, and so on, until the product is finished, obviously wealth is created. Now that's applied stuff. Then we have created wealth, as per artists, poets, literary people. They in turn create wealth, the same thing. So there's lots of ways of creating it directly. And then of course you have the business that I've been going on about, where capital is introduced and you've got factory type processes. The means of production, as it were, gets brought into things, and then that's a different thing that becomes much more applied. That's the applied creation of wealth. But anyway, I'm running out of time here, and I'll maybe continue this on. But what's happened now is, in modern society, is the labour that creates the wealth is now subordinate to the money, the capital that creates the factory complexes and creates the wherewithal for the injection of labour. But you must never forget, at the basics of it all, you can do without the money, you can't do without the labour. Talk more.